What does it actually take to keep people safe? Welcome to the Thought Leader Product Safety Innovation Podcast. I'm Trevor J. Morones, your host. Every day, products reach consumers with gaps that compliance alone can't catch. And the people working to close those gaps are the ones you'll hear from here. Each episode, we connect with leaders shaping product safety and public health, representing one of the four pillars driving real change: alliance, advocacy, awareness, and activism.
Well, this is episode 1 for the Thought Leader Product Safety Innovation podcast. And we have the summit coming up on August 14th, which is a Friday. And we're going to be doing it virtually first. And I'm very fortunate that we have made this happen with the help of Don Morrow, Dr. Darin Detwiler, and Tom Levlocke as our first guest, where we're going to be discussing preparedness. Ironically, we've been discussing this topic for well over a year. I think you and Don have been living this topic for more than that.
Yes.
So let's get into this. And before we do, I will have Dr. Darin Detwiler introduce himself, and then obviously you know Don.
Yes, sir.
Well, hey, it's great to be here. I'm Dr. Darin Detwiler. I'm an author, a keynote speaker, a columnist, and a consultant. I'm also a professor in the area of food safety, corporate social responsibility, leadership. I have written several books, including Food Safety Past, Present Predictions. I'm currently writing a book called The Cost of Doing Nothing. And I dabble in everything from recalls to cybersecurity to foodborne illness outbreaks.
Very nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you too.
Don, you have any opening remarks for Tom?
Well, it's great to be working with Tom again. We've always we got the band back together several months ago, and it's been kind of fun working back in and getting codes prepared and trying to get the regulators and the insurance company on the same page. And most of the time they get there, but Tom's the guy that wrangles the cat. And I've been through this several times. I think three paid gigs, and then there's been a couple other gigs that we've both been involved with trying to get somebody restarted after a disaster. But anyway, it's good to be working back with Tom, and back to you.
Well, I think you got to give some of us an idea of what the band back together means.
Okay, well, back in 2012. And I will remember this day because I'm sitting in my office. I'm getting ready to go to leave for the day. My son David's working a internship with the laboratory that was doing processing samples for us. And he called me on the phone and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm coming through." And then all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. Well, okay. Well, we've been having some fire alarm problems, and they've been resetting it. So I said, "Okay, Dave, don't cut through the plant. Meet me on the parking lot." So I grabbed my briefcase. I'm going out the stairs, and everybody's standing out in the hallway. What are we doing? I said, "Well, it looks to me like you're getting out of the building." So we all rushed out of the building. We get to the parking lot. I get to the car, and I look back over the other side of the facility, and there's smoke coming out of the other side of the facility. And literally, I will say that our lives changed in a matter of about an hour, because we were starting to run a business based upon everything that was left in my cell phone. We had cattle trucks that had to be turned around. So luckily the head of the cattle procurement was out the parking lot with us, and I said, "You can get those trucks turned around now," because we had trucks that were due for delivery in about an hour. We were lucky that all the live animals were dead, so we didn't have to worry about, well, what do we do with the cattle in the pens? We did have a plan for that, by the way. And after a matter of about 12 hours, I drove home, took my son home, and came back to the facility. the fire department finally got the fire under control, and it was terrifying. You've got an ammonia release, you've got this, and you've got all this uncertainty. Are we all going to have jobs tomorrow? And afterwards, we went after the fire department left. We went spelunking with the flashlights that I keep in my car, and I mean, it just made you sick. I mean, the damage was undoable, and I was just, well, how's this going to happen? How's this going to happen? And there's a lot of uncertainty at that particular point in time. We were lucky that Tom got involved with us pretty soon in that process. We got a set of contractors that were absolutely the best in the business, who from cleanup to remediation to resolving plant problems that were, there's almost no way to do it. I mean, literally, I think we stripped the portable refrigeration units off of the Super Bowl, and we took those units and we put them down, and we were pounding out what? Was it 1,000 gallons of diesel a day between that and the trailers?
It was something like that, yeah.
It was a crazy amount of diesel fuel. We had 23 trailers full of damaged goods in the parking lot. We had USDA that was almost unbearable with their requests. I finally got a hold of the district office and got them straightened out. But then we started getting on the right track, and we made a lot of mistakes. Hopefully, a little bit of our discussion today will help alleviate some of those mistakes. Because, hey, while the first guy that shows up may sound like he knows what he's doing, but he probably doesn't, that we encountered that problem. We encountered problems where the insurance company never want to give up their money, right? But the coverage was very, very good. And I think the total claim, when we were all said, it was north of $300 million. And when you start talking about you're going to spend $350 million, that's a real sobering number. When you say, I'm going to spend $300 million, and you're standing there running your business based on your cell phone in the parking lot watching the firefighters fight the fire, that makes things very, very hard. Like I said, we were very lucky. Tom Levlocke got involved with the insurance company, and things got better real fast.
That really sets the tone for the rest of this conversation.
I'm going to kind of turn it over to Tom, because there were several things that he brings to the band. He's kind of that lead singer, the guy that kind of keeps everybody in track. So, Tom, take it away.
Tom, before you get into it, because I know that we're going to come back to this story time and time again, because we always revisit it on regular calls, whether we're just catching up or we're talking about another project, such as the one in Nashville, and we're talking about preparedness and being prepared ahead of situations. But where did you and how did you get started in this business?
Oh, it was, I've always been in construction my entire life. That's all I was ever known.
You must be very good at math.
No, it was honestly, it was my worst subject in school. I think it was around 94. I went to work for one of the larger insurance companies as an estimator. And I realized very quickly that people pay a lot of money in premiums and don't get a lot back on their return. So I figured out a way to take the knowledge that I learned from them and turn it against them, I guess, if this is the best way to describe it. Painting corner to corner, no, we got to do the whole room. It's not going to match. Oh, it'll blend in the corner. No, it won't.
That's attention to detail.
It's so little things like that. The number of outlets in a room, they'll pay to paint the room, but they won't pay to take the cover off. And So that's where you bring the code into it, where unless you're a homeowner, you have to be a licensed electrician to even touch that cover. So those little things is how I did it. And then I landed with one of the top 5 risk management companies in the nation. A couple years before I met Dawn, and it just went from there. It just exploded. And the expertise is that you gain from one of these projects, even if it's your first one or if it's your 10th one, there's always something you're going to learn throughout the process. And when they say it's, just another fire or just another flood, it is, but it isn't, because every situation has something different. You're dealing with different carriers and different adjusters and different personalities, and you have plant people that want to do things one way, and the insurance company wants to do it another, and you have code issues, and it just snowballs. So you just have to learn to, well, we are in Texas, rope it and bring it all together and see where we go from there. So
So where does preparedness start for the business, whether they're up and coming, they're starting from scratch, or they've been in existence?
First thing you do is you want to start with your policy. You want to go to a risk management company, one of the top 5, and have them sit down with them, look at your products, look at your building, look at your facility, equipment cost. Most people don't understand that, and they'll go to a broker, for example, or an agent, for lack of a better word, and the broker or the agent is going to say, okay, well, you've got this much in insurable value, so this is where we'll put the insurance. It's not a correct number. You have to look at not only your building, but your equipment, your trucks, your facility, loss of employment, your employees. You haven't got a plant for them, you're losing them to someone else. You're going to have to retrain them. You need your forensic accountant. You need to look at your business interruption insurance and, what's your product? What's your sales been? Has it been up and down? Has it been even? What's your product worth? And to make sure that you have law and ordinance, code upgrades, loss of product, loss of market share. And these are all little things that Dawn and I have found over the last few years that they have some, but they don't have it all. And fortunately, as he said, that one facility that we met on, they had it all. And it was definitely in their best interest to have it, because they were put back whole and everything was covered. And it doesn't happen overnight. The insurance carrier is going to set a reserve on your loss, and you have to be able to match it or do better than that. You got to look at everything. It can't be just one or two items.
So in the world of product safety, we see that leadership often is looking at spreadsheets and the bottom line, profit, profit, profit. So in this particular case, how do we get individuals to actually see this from a different perspective of CYA, covering your arse ahead of this disruption that can happen? Because it's not just from events like fires, there are natural disasters that happen too. How do we actually get buy-in from these operations when leadership is most focused on the bottom line for profit, and we need them to be looking at this from a different perspective ahead of something, and with the mindset of let's evaluate the risk to understand these things that truly can happen? And now we need to start even talking about cybersecurity. How often is that even addressed?
Very rarely. I think that the first part to start is you need to sit down with your financial team and you need to look at your coverages. So when you look at that, get a value on your building. What's your building worth? What's your equipment worth? You're going to have those numbers, those spreadsheets. What's your daily burn rate? How much product are you bringing in? How much are you packaging and putting out? What does your employee hourly rates look like? Insurance, taxes, shipping cost. All these things are insurable, but it has to be in the right package. And that's when you sit down with your risk manager and you go through these things line by line, item by item. And when you realize that, wow, if I had a fire or a flood tomorrow, I'm so underinsured. And, do you have a co-insurance? Do you have, is it a replacement cost policy? What's my depreciation going to look like? It's, there's so many different levels to this, and it just needs to be looked at and need a hard look so you're prepared.
So we really need to disassemble what we have, go through it and understand what is truly present, what the numbers are telling us, and then go back to figure out, are we going to be covered and operational? And if not, how quickly are we going to become operational in the event that something, or when something takes place? That's not really if.
Typically, with a fire, depending on the square footage of the building, it can be a year to 2 years before you're back in operation. So you want to look at other options. What's your backup for off-site? Who do you have that can, cut for you, can slaughter your cattle, or who you can slaughter but you can't process? So who's going to be able to fill that gap for you to keep you moving? The last thing you want to do is lose market share or, product or clients. You want to keep them as long as you can. And so you need a backup plan at who can slaughter for me, who can process for me if I'm out either of those or both, and how long is it good for? What's it going to cost me? What's that number?
So you were talking about you and Don, where you all met on this particular project, and a lot of it was already set up. So they already had a partner in place to help them in the event that something took place.
Yes.
It was expensive. It's expensive to go to your nearest competitor and ask them to run an extra shift for you. It's also a humbling experience too, guys.
But would it have been less expensive to not have that in place?
No. I'll take. There was two clients in particular that within a week of the fire, they actually personally showed up and begged us to please get going as quickly as we possibly could. And they're very known celebrity type customer, and it was like they wanted to stay with us. They didn't want to go out and find a new supplier. They wanted us to do it just because of the story that we brought to the table. But the problem was, it was like we're trying now to overcome something that is almost unimaginable. You go to your nearest competitor, and then they run the slaughter ship for you, great, but then your product goes into their box and goes to your customers. I mean, they've got to understand what's going on with that, and that's only a temporary solution.
So there was full transparency to everybody involved in that situation, because people had specs to meet, and if it wasn't your product, then they wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and I also say that there were certain things that I'll say that there were things before the fire and things after the fire. The things before the fire that it wasn't optimal, but we learned how to work around. You have workarounds. Human beings are great at figuring workarounds. You figure a workaround and how to make something work when it wasn't in the optimal conditions. So it cost you extra labor, it cost you extra materials, it cost you yield, it cost man hours, it cost any number of things that you can imagine. And we over time have learned to live with those things. And then when you have this catastrophe, you get rid of some of those barriers that it doesn't have to be this way. And Tom and I went through a big learning curve with the operations group, because they were saying, well, we'll put it back the way it was. Yeah, we're going to put it back the way it was, but there was things about the way it was that weren't right. And there were some of those battles that we won, and there was some of those battles that we lost. And likewise, some of the battles that we lost, I hate to say I told you so, but guess what? 10 years later, we were proven that the things that we were telling them that needed to be done, and that, we're not going to do that because nobody's going to do it that way, because you had to do it that way. And so it's a big change. I'll say, have a list of those things, those workarounds, because it's very important. We as human beings learn how to do the workarounds, but sometimes there's a better way. And I'm saying that we have to find the better way. And once we do that, we improve the whole process.
Something interesting to add to what you're saying, Don, is that process is such a challenge when you can quantify it is going to cost X amount of money for this monitoring software. It is going to cost X amount of money for this insurance coverage. It is going to cost X amount of money for a new compressor or a new refrigeration unit, right? But when we say, well, we can't afford that, it's amazing how people haven't said, well, but what's the cost of our loss of reputation? What's the cost when we land 10 people in the morgue? What's the cost, when we have to shut down for X amount of time? We have to shut down this entire facility until further notice. Now, that might be a year, right? It's weird how many times these huge costs are not calculated into things because they're imaginable. They're fictional right now, but only in that human's mind in terms of, we'll deal with what we have to deal with right now. There's a picture behind me that involves a submarine. And back in the early 90s, I was a nuclear engineer on a submarine. I can't tell you how many times we had fire drills and flooding drills and all these different catastrophe drills kind of a thing. I mean, over and over and over again. But I tell you this, when I was actually in fires and I was actually in flooding, that is not the time to figure out what you got to do when you're in a submarine hundreds of feet beneath the surface of the ocean. And same thing with the big business. When you have consumer health on the line, people's jobs, a family legacy, whatever it is on the line, that's not the time to figure out, we're going to figure out how to do a recall. Or now we're going to figure out what to do if this situation comes up. If you haven't invested and prepared in terms of mock recalls and recall simulations or all these other scenarios, and you haven't figured out the cost of doing things, it's essentially you've made the decision as a leader to ignore this and to not be prepared. And I mean, we don't have to go back too far. Trevor, I believe you and I were talking about this not too long ago. Remember, was it late 2024? McDonald's had that outbreak tied to their onions.
Yes.
Remember that?
The onions. Taylor Farms, correct?
Yeah. A, why were they using Taylor Farms? There was a history there, right? But B, they should have been able to have done their own independent validation and testing of this, not to take their supplier's word for it. And it would not have cost more than a few $1,000,000 at the most. And yet, as soon as those headlines, as soon as we had 9 deaths, all of a sudden, McDonald's comes out and says, we're going to invest $100 million into preventing this from happening again. It would have cost them far less to have prevented it in the first place than to throw hundreds of millions of dollars into it after the fact. That reactionary crisis management approach is not financially responsible, and it is not responsible to your employees or to your customers.
Could we go on to say that's not even ethical for business or anything?
I've got an example of this. This happened to me back. I hate to say I was a wallflower in a CNN news conference, but I was back in the mid '90s, and it was a company that doesn't exist anymore called Hudson Foods. And I'll say that Mr. Hudson was really good at understanding prevention, and really good at running chicken plants, and really good at understanding what food safety was. But he was not the guy that needed to go in front of CNN, and they ripped him apart. And by the next day, he was in New York City. He had talked to the media consultant and got that, but the damage was done. And I'll say that USDA made some really bad, did some bad things during those news conferences as well. And one of the first things that I started talking about when I started getting upper management was, who is the spokesperson? How are we going to address media? What are we going to do? And I actually went through training with a man named Mark Bernheimer. He used to work for CNN. And, the training that we had with him was amazing, because literally he said, okay, we're going to do training on next Thursday, right? Okay, great. When I stepped out of my car, he's got a guy with a camera with a microphone in my face saying, okay, well, what is it got you being a bloody-handed baby killer? He really rocked our world. And he did that with the entire management group, unbeknownst to me. And then he trained us, and it only took us about 6 hours worth of training. And once we came out, once we did that, we were polished. There was such a difference between the before and the after that only about 6 hours worth of training took care of on the C-suite guys. But we don't need that kind of training. We already know how to talk to the media. No, you don't. So making sure that you understand that could be catastrophic to your business. And you know what? You don't even think about it. You don't even really talk about it. Oh, the finance guy is going to take care of this. What if the finance guy is on vacation in Spain? You don't have that information. You don't have him there. Who's going to be his backup? Who's going to be trained?
Great choice for vacation, by the way. And I'd like to say that it's also important for leadership to understand what it is to create things in the moment and get out of what they think is their comfort zone, because being in their comfort zone only allows them to run into continuous barriers. And guess what? Things aren't fair. That's the reality of life.
It is.
But you have to be quick to create and do it with a way that you have removed these particular barriers so that you can actually flourish. And having a camera shoved in your face getting out of the car, that's quite challenging physically and emotionally.
What is this about you being a bloody-headed baby killer? That's a phrase that I use in my Hassel classes, but it's like, the shock value of that, and the expression on my face was just classic. And I'm going, oh, okay, yeah, you need to understand what they're doing. I'll say, this comes from the Mark Bernheimer training was, what are the three things that you're going to say when they put the camera in your face? So you don't know. Make sure you write those down and memorize them.
That's a great point.
Tom, you want to talk a little bit about code and how we address code in these claims?
Good point, Don. Code upgrades. You're going to make sure you're covered on that. If your plant was built in 1960 or it was built in 2010, code changes every so many years. What do you have for coverage? Is your electrical system up to date? Depending on the size of your facility, you could have $4 or $5 million in code upgrades just in your electrical system. It's what's your OSHA codes? What's your USDA codes? What are your workstations? If you're on a slaughter floor, are your workstations spaced equally apart or far enough apart? As Don and I found out, we had a facility that the workstations were too close together and the space had to be doubled. And that's a large number, and that's a lot of money if you're not prepared for that. So I think that as far as the codes go, I think you need to look at the year it was built. You need to do a risk assessment of somebody that understands what the codes are, what are the new codes that are coming in, what's this going to take, if something happened. Okay, do I do it now? No, you're grandfathered in per your policy. If you have it, you just run on the grandfather clause until something happens. But when that happens, they're expecting you, if it's over 50% damaged, they're expecting you to meet new codes.
Well, what if we have a facility that has cinder blocks that were made 1990 or earlier that may have asbestos in there, and then the USDA comes to us and says, we can't even be in this facility. Now we have a conditional grant of inspection, but we can't even function, we can't operate. So now before there's been a disaster, there's already a disaster.
So you have to encapsulate at that point. You're not going to take your cinder block walls down. That's cost prohibitive on a multitude of levels. So you encapsulate. What do you encapsulate with? You know, what product is the USDA going to allow for you to put it in? How is that going to be installed? What equipment needs to be moved? What utilities need to come off the walls? So there's a whole level of items that need to be addressed before you could just come in and encapsulate it. So if that scenario is the way it happens, it's not just throwing a coat of paint on it and walking away. It's physically encapsulating the entire area that needs to be done, that has that.
So in that risk assessment you're talking about, we really want to evaluate where we are geographically, what's upwind, downwind, and all of the materials that were used to make the building, not just the year that it was built, but possibly what can we figure out from any upgrades that have taken place.
Correct.
Hopefully there hasn't been anybody cutting corners, but in business, people are either looking to make money or not lose money.
It's honestly, how many maintenance supervisors at a facility are up to date on the current codes?
I was waiting for Don to chime in with a chuckle.
You want to take it, Don?
Yeah, I'll say that oftentimes we run our equipment into obsolescence. We run our equipment into the place where you can't find parts. We run our equipment to, it's been rewired by Joe and Jose over here, and their rewiring is not really, it's not really the way the engineers designed it, but it works. But then when you start cleaning it with water, high pressure water and caustic and acids and put sanitizer on it, it causes problems. And making sure everybody understands that. I mean, I have a maintenance guy that I was dealing with with one of my clients, and literally they took leaf blowers, electric leaf blowers, and were blowing the condensation off the ceiling with them. I'm going, you can't do that.
That sounds like a environmental monitoring nightmare.
But I'll also say that it kind of goes to one of my pet peeves. I keep telling people, get your hat and coat, Myrtle. Let's go out in the floor and find out what's really going on. How many times have people been on third shift? Go watch your sanitation crew. They'll love to see you. They'll want to show you what they do. They really try hard. But if they're not the first group that you schedule in the day and they get the leftover time, you're not going to get the good results. So, there's my hit on sanitation and maintenance. I kind of had my hit on operations earlier, but making sure that we all understand that we're all working for the same problem. And you know what? We got to stay on the same side of the street together. We can't get across the street and throw rocks at one another. It's not going to work.
That's a great opportunity to bring in product safety culture. Where does insurance framework and product safety culture reinforce or undermine each other in your perspective, Tom?
Underinsured.
Okay.
Not the proper insurance.
Or not covered. Yeah.
Or not covered at all.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw something out there. Tom and I talked about this. How many times have y'all looked at your automobile insurance policy? Do I really need that coverage for that automobile right now? I haven't. The bill comes in, I pay the bill, and guess what? They give me the little card, I put it in my car. Hopefully I'll never need it. But how do I know that it's the right coverage? How do I know that? Oh, I'm spending XYZ on this vehicle, but it's only worth $10,000.
Or you have a policy and it's only a quarter of what your building is actually insured for because you haven't revisited it in 4 or 5 years. And, that you asked where to start. A good place to start is review your insurance coverage. When was the last time you actually looked at it? What's the value of your building? How much are you spending in product today versus when you bought your policy 5 years ago? Did you bought what you thought you needed then? Thankfully, you haven't had a situation where you've needed that coverage, but you haven't addressed it either. What about inflation? What about, appreciation and value of your property, your product, your equipment? How many new pieces of equipment have you replaced? How many trucks have you brought in, traded out? When was the last time you did your roof? Has anybody addressed your refrigeration system in the last year? Not the evaporators and the condenser inside, but the physical equipment, your compressors, your high side and your low side. Where's all that? What's that look like?
Has your insurance company sent somebody in to do a risk assessment of your programs and your policy and your flow to make sure that they understand what's going on? If they haven't, you know what? Your liability insurance is probably underrated.
Well, there's also the issue, earlier this year, I had an opportunity to sit down with some of the folks at the USDA and the FDA, and both of them, this was 2 different meetings, both of them brought up the role of insurance companies. How can we get them to not only incentivize the larger companies, their larger clients, they do this thing called, it's basically pre-incident funding. The idea that they're going to take some money and say, you get this equipment, you get this training, because if you do, you will be less of a liability than if you don't have this, right? And you typically see this again with the larger companies, but it's the medium and smaller companies that need that support and that financial motivation. I want to say motivation, that financial advantage in order to be able to upgrade to their training, their technology, whatever it is, to be preventing the next outbreak or recall.
That's a great point. So what prompted the FDA and the USDA to bring this up in conversation earlier in the year?
We look at the idea of being recall ready, which is perfect for this conversation, the idea of readiness. Too many companies don't do these mock recalls or recall simulations. They say, we have a binder, we'll blow off the dust if we need to, kind of a thing. And they look at how they're set up to do this. It's amazing how many recalls are needed to take place on the day when the FSQA lead is out of town, or on a weekend, or a shift where you don't have the right people in play. You've identified 8 people to do these specific jobs, and if they're not there because either they've been fired or they've quit or they're not in that shift for whatever reason, and then people like, I know the binder's over there. You have to be a little bit more prepared than that. Again, like on the submarine, we had to train over and over and over again for fire, flooding, etc. You can't figure it out when you're there in the thick of it. And so it really came down to the idea of not only incentivization, but how do we prepare for the future? And how do these insurance companies allow companies, you mentioned the one earlier that has had outbreak after outbreak, after recall, after recall, after recall. How many times can we crash our car of our own negligence and expect our insurance company to be like, oh, don't worry, everything will be the same. Just keep doing what you're doing. You won't have to pay more. We're not going to be critical of you. We're not going to require you to up your coverage, kind of a thing. That doesn't happen. But it does to us as drivers at home, but it does happen within the food industry. It's amazing how many companies are allowed to get away with X, Y, and Z because it's just part of doing business. It's just the cost of doing business. These things are accumulated into they're kind of adjusted into the cost of doing things. But when we look at some of these examples, Chipotle, right? Chipotle lost a ton of money. I mean, so much money, it's still almost incalculable. But if you look at how the standard model was 1/4 of stock exchange decrease and 3/4 of stock exchange trading to go back to the pre-incident value. 4 quarters total. It took Chipotle 15 quarters to get back to their pre-incident values. And then what do? Industry magazines rave about how they've come back from the brink of disaster and how they're back on top, and they usually go out and get some award from some company, some conference or whatever, for how good they're doing with food safety now. But it's like, yeah, but you still lost a ton of money. People lost their jobs. People lost their lives, or people's lives have been forever impacted by this. And we can't overlook that. So it's not the role of a leader to be able get away with, if something happens, we'll take care of it. It's the job of a leader to say, we're going to do everything we can to be prepared and prevent this from happening in the first place. That is the ethical leader. That is the leader with intent. I don't know about you and me. I'm not waiting. I'm not what do they call those? Doomsday prepper. But I have an emergency bag if something were to happen. Because if something happens and I have to get out of my house, I don't want to be like, oh, where's this? Where's that? What am I going to do? I actually have some of these things ready to go, because I want to be somewhat prepared. And it's all this work I do professionally has allowed me to, or forced me, depending on how you look at it, to look back at myself and be like, am I practicing what I'm preaching? Because if I'm telling people to be prepared in industry, and yet I'm not prepared myself at home, then I'm kind of a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with being prepared, I've had a go bag packed for I don't know how many years, and it's just habit. It's whether I'm going to work or I'm running from a hurricane. Typically, I'm running into them, not away from them. But no, you're right. You got to be prepared for it, and I think a good place to start is get a risk assessment done. Whether it's done privately, we do a value of the building, and we spend a couple of days looking at your equipment and what are your rail heights, what are your workstation spacing, and what's your electrical room look like? Has Joe the maintenance man just kind of tied stuff in through remember the one, Don, that we had the 480 lines tied through the front of the breaker box? That stuff can't happen. And that's a risk. So you want to look at that. And I guess it's like anything. It starts at home and then you take it from there.
Absolutely. I think Darin set the foundation for the next question. And I'm really happy that he brought up a lot of the stuff of, we practice this. Not only is it stuff that we preach, but we practice it. And something very simple as, 5S lean methodology about getting things and having them in order so that when chaos is coming, there's more structure to figuring out where things are supposed to be and they're in proper places, which helps to be most efficient when executing. But what does a failure reveal about prevention infrastructure that preceded it? I chuckled when you said you run into hurricanes, because I know that even though we're talking about preparedness, you're also very much of a person to go and be on site post, disaster situation. We're on the phone and you go, hey, did you hear about anything happening in this particular area? And I go, I think I saw a building. Let me check in for you.
Yeah, so two things. When there's a loss at a facility, two things want to happen. You want to know who's going to be there to help you out, who's going to walk you through it, who's going to mitigate further damages from this storm. I want to save what I can, or from this event, I want to save everything that I can. So, okay, is that board up of windows, temporary tarping? If you're running a facility on a daily basis, and who's going to do that for you? Your maintenance man? Do you know who to call? Do you have a program in place for that? You should have a binder with who's my first call? Who is going to help me, guide me through this process? Are you going to call Zebra Restoration Company because they were recommended by your brother-in-law's cousin's second wife? It's what's their timeline look like? How do they have the equipment or the means to get the equipment to get you back up and running, to clean you up? When you go into these, if you got a contractor that comes in and says, yeah, we'll work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, hang up the phone. You need a company that's going to be willing to come in there and work 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week until it's done. And if that takes a year, it's a year. It doesn't happen overnight, but you also have to have the right people in place to get you back as quickly as you can.
That reminds me of a situation when Hurricane Sandy came through the tri-state area, and we had said, look, we need to have a generator in place. Well, we're working with the city to get, more power. No, this is not more power. We need to be prepared and ready for business continuity because we have hundreds of millions of dollars of product in this building. And we're always putting out product as well, but there needs to be something to keep this afloat. And then the hurricane came and they said, okay, find those generators. And I said, hey, best of luck to you. There aren't generators around.
So with a situation like that, if you get with the right group ahead of time, a right of first refusal contract or something, a non-monetary situation, just a basic agreement that, hey, this is my facility, this is what I produce daily, here's my daily burn rate. What do I do if the power goes out for a week? What do I do if the water system fails and they shut the water off? Where do we go from there? You find the right group that has generators or access to generators, portable boilers, portable water tanks. You need to be able to pump the bad water out. You're going to use a frac tank to pump it into to take it to a waste site facility. So an event is not the end of end all. If you have the right group, we can put you back together enough to keep you shipping at least within a few days. But you got to be, you got to have that in play before something happens. It's your go bag. You need a go bag. Basically, is the only way to describe it.
If there is a summary to put in later, it will be to have a go bag, and we'll talk about all the stuff we're putting in it. I liked how you've referred several times now to having people that are diverse in their backgrounds that can provide specific things. Don talked about media training, which is not something that I thought about in my 20 years of being involved in food manufacturing until really connecting with Don and you. And we're talking about doing these simulations with classes to get them to think outside the box and be prepared. And okay, here is your case study. Go. You got 5 minutes to figure this out. And they're like, we don't have enough time. Like in the times you're losing time as you're dragging your feet.
So basically, if I'm understanding you, what's the fire drill look like? What do we do? Okay, do we have it on paper and we don't have a discussion about it? And we dust, as Darin said, we dust the book off when it happens. When was the last time that drill book, for lack of a better term, that should be updated quarterly. It addressed quarterly, because your situation is fluid. Where are my gas shutoffs? Oh, the maintenance guy knows it. Well, what happens if the maintenance man isn't there that day? Who's his backup? What happens if the backup guy isn't there? Who else is going to know where those shutoffs are? Who's going to have keys to access that area?
That's great. And it sounds a lot like what Don puts together in class for students. He says, look, you have to have a champion, and then you have to have a deputy, and then they have to have a deputy to back them up. So this multi-departmental diverse team really needs to be all encompassing, and everybody has to own a piece of this for this to be effective and efficient.
You know, I had one project many years ago, and it was impressive after I got there and talking with the facility that the number of people that just stepped up from as little as directing traffic to running to the store to buy bottled water to, you know, okay, we need to do this and we need to board this up and we need to make sure this is shut off. And it got me thinking at that point as that needs to be in everybody's go bag. And that, you know, you have those steps. That's the easy part for you. That's your start right there. Okay, you make a phone call to Dawn. Hey, I've got a fire. I've got a flood. I need some direction here. Are you following the book that we've put together?
That's a rhetorical question, right, Tom?
No,
exactly.
But we're not.
or if you're not, you need to be. I'm a 6-hour flight away. I'm not 15 minutes down the street, but I'm on my way.
Or a 15-hour drive. You were just in Pennsylvania.
We won't go there. That was more like a 30-hour drive for that storm.
Oh, that's right, snowstorm.
Well, on that note, so I'm on my city's. I live near Los Angeles, but not in Los Angeles, and we're already preparing for the 2028 games of the Summer Olympic Games. And here was something we were recently talking about. Most of our city's firefighters work a 3-day shift, and when they're not here, they live far away. And a lot can be said about the police as well. A lot of the police don't live in the area, and there's been criticism over certain places in Southern California where the police chief lives 6-hour drive away or whatever in another state sometimes. And when there's a catastrophe, we're left with the resources we have. So we have to prepare our community to be able to do certain things on its own. And I'm a member of my local CERT team, the Community Emergency Response Team. So we have these weird conversations about that, the idea of you can't just say we have these resources. Yeah, on a perfect day, on a perfect shift, if everyone's there in town and is not isolated because this bridge is out or this road is closed or, whatever it is, you've got to be able to do this. And I even brought up the fact that back when I was a high school teacher, almost none of us lived anywhere close to where we taught because it was too expensive to live there. We lived far away. And, we had to tell the other teachers, you might want to make sure you have a change of clothes, a heavy coat, a gallon of water in your car because it's not going to do you any good if it's back home. So it's weird how there are things that make logical sense. There are things that are fine on paper, but if you're not really understanding where's your workforce going to come from, where's these people in charge going to be, and if something happens right now, who's left here to deal with this? And realize, I think someone mentioned it earlier, no one knew where the shutoff valve was for the gas, or no one knew they knew where it was, but they couldn't find the tool, kind of a deal. Well, if you're only telling the one guy, I guarantee he's not going to be there when you need him the most. And all those other people that do want to step up, their barrier is that lack of information.
Exactly. It's one thing if you get a natural disaster, what happens? Earthquake, floods, fires, wildfires. Weather patterns change your flight patterns. So if I'm on the East Coast and you need me on the West Coast, how am I getting there? How soon can I get there for you? And it has to be realistic. It has to be something that you can maintain because your client is looking for you to be there to step up to this. And if you can't get in because of flights or, you got to drive, that's changes your whole timeline at how things progress from there. So you have to be prepared to keep yourself going for a few days until the professionals can come in to step up and take care of this for you. In the event that public transportation or air travel has been, roads are closed, so that happens. We have to be, what's your backup plan? So your backup plan needs a backup plan.
Well, back to my submarine days, there were many times where they would call all off-duty personnel forward to the engineering spaces for training, and that's when they would do a surprise drill and see if the people who were back there, because step one is to isolate the compartment.
Yeah.
Well, if you just isolate all the people with the knowledge or the skill set and the tools, then you're left with whoever's back there. And, they would purposely do that to see, okay, what could we do with what we have on hand? And a good survey of true recall simulations are done, in the morning shift on a Monday when all the people are there, not,
Yep.
A Friday after 9 o'clock at night.
Yep. It's, and I agree. I think that should be in everybody's book to do at least once a year, if not, twice a year.
Yeah.
We sound the fire alarm. We've set it up with with the local fire department, with this group here, with somebody that, okay, what do we do? Here's the scenario that we supposedly have. This is what our drill is based on. Nobody knows about it but a couple of people. And we come in, okay, we're calling the board up people. We're calling, we're getting a temporary roof on. We've got a temporary water supply set up. We've got generators rolling. All that can be done on paper in a conference room to bring it to the forefront, to the seriousness of how much people need these. These companies need this.
I'll add one more note. My observation has always been that one of the biggest obstacles to changes, whether it's preparedness or equipment or all these different things, is the director of finance.
Yeah.
You know who's never involved in a drill to see what actually goes on? The director of finance.
Exactly. And they're the first ones to shut off the funds that you need.
That's too expensive.
We don't need to do that.
That's not in our budget. You need to make sure, whether we're talking about the communications people or even the director of finance, your legal counsel.
Yeah.
Why are they not involved in these drills to see what goes on?
And the other thing is, do you really want to be negotiating contracts in the middle of an event? No. You want to have your contracts in play before. So that's all you got to do is you call company A, who will take care of, and call company B, C, D, and E. And within, Don, what would you say, 72 hours we get people mobilized realistically?
Realistically, 72 hours would be a miracle.
And we've done it.
You're probably going to see it's going to be next week, no matter what happens.
Yeah. But, you can't promise when they're going to get there. You don't know, again, road conditions and, so there's a lot of laws now with these truckers can't drive straight through the night like they used to. So, you have to look at all that too. What's that timeline look like?
One of the things I think that we underutilize is there's resources out there that we don't use that are more or less what we call free or already paid for. In one facility that I was in, they had somebody that came in and reviewed from the insurance company, came in and reviewed my food safety programs. And he was actually somebody that knew what he was doing. And he became quite the resource, particularly when we were going for GFSI, SQF certification. And it cost us nothing. It was part of our service. There was the head of the laboratory services, Muhammad Kamari. Muhammad would give us a free consulting visit twice a year. so he could come in and make and review things like sanitary dress and sampling procedures and that sort of thing. These things we already paid for. And then likewise, I hate to say, I've met the guy that I'm from the federal government, but I'm here to help you. But I've actually found one that is really good, and it's programmed in the Department of Homeland Security, and it's called the Protective Security Advisor. Every state has one, and you can look them up, and you call them up and say, "Hey, I need a cybersecurity review," and they'll come and review it. Oh, I need you to come and do. We had him over from my church. We need for him to come out and do active shooter training and then review our safety procedures. And we got a lot of good stuff from Clanahan because he came in and really did those things. So there's resources that we have out there that we don't utilize. We don't utilize our fire chief or our police chief or our sheriff. And these are public servants that are here to help us. And it's one of those things of, okay, well, I need somebody to review my security. You call down to the substation, and Wichita will send an officer out and somebody that knows what they're talking about. So there's a lot of things that we talk about costs and this sort of thing, but there's other things that don't quite cost us anything, but we can get some good information from it.
That's a great point. And last year we learned that through the Beef Industry Food Safety Council Summit that the FBI had a lot to say and was interested to participate in some of these conversations, not only to share what they had learned, but to actually get information from other people.
Yeah.
And the FBI did not know about the person in the Department of Homeland Security. That was one thing that kind of floored me a little bit. I'm going to say the local military folks will help you too, and they've got some broad-based resources. You just got to find the right person. But saying like here in Wichita, McConnell Air Force Base, they have people that will actually come out and help you with things. I would say that they helped with the $300 million loss. They helped with the firefighting. They did. They actually sent personnel down to help us, which was fantastic. You get three counties in three very rural counties in Kansas trying to get the right amount of personnel in there. They didn't have the manpower.
You just brought up a good point. Firefighting services. You can be insured for that. How many companies are? Not many. And, a lot of fire departments, they're free, the volunteer services and whatnot. But there's some that are not. And, bringing in from out of state for mutual aid calls and things. So it's another got to be covered for it.
Yeah. The guys that fought the fire, the product that we're working on right now, they actually had people come in from 3 states to help them. They were in such a rural place. And I mean, it's pretty scary when you say, the fire department had 2 hours to drive. They had to bring a ladder truck from 2 hours away, and then they went home, but then they had to come back the next day because they didn't got it out yet. Oh,
that's quite a haul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they got done, and they didn't leave the truck. They just went home, and then they came back the next day and put the fire out. But it took them. And in this case, the ladder truck had to reach over, it was like 150, 200 feet over where the fire was actually in the middle of the building and actually get it. Tom's got a scary story on this one, too.
Really going to make me go there, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know if you go there.
I had an incident on the West Coast a while ago. Get out there, and it was a food facility. But the fire department didn't have equipment to reach the center of the building. So they could get in 100 feet on either side and on one end. And that left, I don't remember the number of feet in the length, maybe 1,000 feet in the length by 200 feet down the center that couldn't be put out. They kept burning. So how do you do that? excavators and water trucks.
Okay, excavators and water trucks. How many water trucks?
2.
Oh, I was expecting more like 20, man.
They would come back at night when it flared up, so it worked.
Well, then, did you have diesel on site for everybody to refuel and that sort of thing? Or?
Oh yeah, we have. So when you have an incident like this, you need to be set up with you're self-sufficient. You don't want to be running down to the local filling station to get diesel fuel. So you bring bulk tanks in, and so you set up a staging area. How many Connex boxes do you need for cleaning supplies and products? And what is your power situation look like? How big's your temporary generator? Do you need one? Until you can get a temp power service set up. How do you supply water for these guys? Everybody's got to have water. I was on a project in Texas a few years ago, and it was ingenious. And we're doing it now on the project that I'm on. Chest freezer, filling in at night with bottled water, taking it out in the morning in the first hour and a half before you really need it. It's already started to unthaw and it's cold. Saves you money on ice, and you have cold water. So why waste money on ice? Just buy water and freeze it. So, you learn to set these things up, temporary offices and phone service. What service do you have? Where I'm at now, that service does not work very well.
Which is why we're here in Amarillo.
Exactly. Do you have a backup system? What internet provider do you have that supplies a mobile service that will work? Or do you go to satellite? It's so as the guys going in to assist and to help, there's things that we have to be prepared for as well. And so it's more of a team effort. So the facility where you get a phone call and say, hey, can you be halfway across the country or 3/4 of the way across the country by Thursday? Yeah, I can. Then it's like, okay, now I got to figure out, I got 4 days to figure out what I need to make this site, to start putting this back together whole, to make them whole. What services do I need? So you need to have those things as a private entity or business owner, or even a manager for that matter of a company that is providing these services. What do you have in your playbook? How does your go bag look? Do you have a temporary internet? Do you have office trailers? Who do you call to rent those? How quick can they get them for you? I deal a lot with a company out of Kansas City that I called yesterday for Connex boxes and I got them this morning. So they have a really good turnaround, and they provide, it's basically a site service provider. So you want to make sure that you have them in your Rolodex, that they are responsive to you and they're going to deliver what you have. So it's not only the facilities that have to have a go bag, it's the providers as well.
So it's everybody. And in this community of team members, we need to have Rolodex of service providers or product suppliers. We need primary, secondary, and tertiary options, because that's before the pandemic, this is something that I think was in practice for some and not all. And then when the supply chain disruption, people would go, what do you think? And I would say, I think that we were unprepared when we could have been prepared. The supply chain disruption was not the end all be all, but it was one of those things where we definitely saw this coming.
So to that point, and to Don's point earlier of when we started here, of the band's back together, the band hadn't been together in 6 or 7 years, I guess, all of us as a group collectively, but we were all back together on the same page within 24 hours we already had a game plan in play and knew what suppliers that each of us brought to the table, what our strengths were, and what it would need to take to pull this off. And so, that's impressive. In being a part of that band, it's an honor because you have a privilege to work with outstanding individuals that step up to the plate. And we're from all over the country, but we can come together that quick. So basically a phone call. So
sounds like more than a jam session, though.
It can be.
It's in the stadium with 500,000 people. It's the way it feels. It does feel like the mega concert when you get started. No matter if it's a small or a big company, it just makes it. You just got to do it. And
the 3 strikes, Don. You show up on site. You don't have your hard hat. Strike 1. Strike 2. You don't have steel-toed boots. Strike 3. You have no idea where you're getting somebody to do a board up or to even turn on temporary power.
And you don't got your flashlight.
There you go.
Because you're going to be spelunking in there no matter how you think about it.
Yeah. Make sure you have batteries in your flashlights too.
Yeah. Yeah, they get wore out pretty quick.
Even when they're rechargeable, quote unquote.
I just charged those batteries this morning.
Yeah.
You put the dead ones back in, my friend. We won't mention any names, though.
Weird observation. I go to a lot of food safety conferences, but I've also gone to some of those disaster preparedness conferences. Literally the doomsday prepper, the great earthquake, the great fire, whatever it is, kind of a thing. And I remember last time I went to one of those emergency preparedness conferences, and my takeaway was that why isn't some of that being present at these food safety conferences? Because I guarantee you there are people in food safety that could really learn a lot from, wow, we've never thought about that as a backup for our files, our digital files and in contracts. Wow.
Yeah.
Our employee files, our training files, our certifications and validations. Wow. Independent, like you're talking about gasoline and water and ice and things like that. You would think that there would be enough mutual Venn diagram overlap that those things would be focused on, but they're not. Weird.
Let's take a hurricane, for example. What's the first thing to go in a hurricane? Water and plywood. What are the 2 things you need most? Water and plywood. It's April, and I'm already looking at what are trailer loads of plywood going to cost this year? Where is it going to come from? Where are you going to stage it when you get it?
I think it's funny when I'll hear company executives say, well, there's no way for us to have planned on or predicted, blah, blah. How come Home Depot is always able to use satellite weather forecasting to determine that they need to have more electrical generators or plywood or whatever in certain areas?
No, the person we need to learn from is Waffle House.
Yeah. Yeah.
They got it on, dude. The Waffle House will be open, I guarantee you.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it the Waffle House preparedness plan? They are always open.
Wait, I got one better.
Okay.
Whataburger
Yeah.
and Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
I was at a Pizza Hut here in South Texas after an event, and they were literally had the doors open. We can only sell you medium pepperonis, pizzas, that's all we have, as they were sweeping the glass out of the lobby with the board ups still on the windows. Now that's prepared.
Wow.
True story.
Wow. I will, in the support of the pizza folks, though, about 10 years ago, I was shut in at Milwaukee's airport. Like, grounds crew was gone, flights were grounded, and there were maybe a dozen of us stuck there at midnight in the airport. Police had gone, everyone's gone. Someone picked up their phone, called a pizza, and some little car. How did that little car get all the way up to gate 7 or terminal 7, whatever it was, to deliver a pizza? And yet no one could service anything at the airport.
I remember during COVID, I was stranded in Atlanta, and it was the same thing. It was like you were there by yourself. It's like something out of a horror movie. It was
like a zombie apocalypse.
That's exactly what I was looking for.
I was in Chicago that week. Okay, yeah, it was. I mean, when you walk through the terminal and you hear your footsteps echo.
Wow,
it's a little scary.
It's scary. I mean, you start looking over at the glass to see if there's zombies pressed up against the glass trying to get you.
Give me a hurricane or a fire any day. I'll go into that in a second. Those deserted terminals are a little unnerving.
Wow. So some of these things that we've revisited is having the community of people, but really it's not just a community in lax terms. It's individuals that can really step up and perform and show up with resources or services and have gone through simulations or real world experiences and then optimizing on resources that are already available. Don said, look, there's some of these things that you don't have to pay for, but start with that and then get the go bag out and evaluate it on a regular basis, quarterly, twice per year, annually, whatever it needs, but don't wait until there is some sort of snafu that takes place.
Yep. You don't want to be opening it up in the parking lot in your front seat the day of you're watching the water be pumped out of your building or water being pumped in your building. And another thing we've touched on fires and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes, hailstorms.
Oh.
You get hailstorms, softball size hail. I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it for my own eyes.
Cannonball size hail. I've seen it twice. Both of them are in Texas, pretty close to where you are right now. One of which I remember I was a kid, and I remember we had hail damage on a refrigerator in the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
Hailstones were coming through the window and hitting the wall, and then bouncing off into another room about 50 feet. It was pretty scary. And then the other one was the amount of hematomas we cut out of cattle. It killed like 500 head of cattle in the feed yards with these huge hailstones. And we cut hematomas out of cattle for like 8 weeks.
Yeah, it was
terrible.
I was in one in Nebraska, actually. And you drive down through town, and it looked like a war zone. The brick facades were destroyed on the front of buildings. Yeah. Windows were boarded up.
The shingles were all broken and on the ground. It hit the shingles so hard it broke them off the houses.
I was at a biorefinery out there that took heavy damage. What do your outside plumbing look like, for your transfer lines and things like that? It's how do you, where do you start? It's those too. It's not just fires, floods, and hurricanes and earthquakes. It's all the way across the board.
And as we discussed in the beginning, we also need to be addressing cybersecurity, but though there is a requirement, not all the facilities actually have a robust plan in place for food defense programs. Correct.
The one thing and one learning experience that I had from the big fire was, it's all backed up on in-house on the server. Everything's fine. Well, what if the server doesn't have power? What if the server gets damaged with smoke and ammonia? And we were kind of lucky because somebody was old school and was making the little tapes. They plug it in there like twice a week and then take them home. That's how we ran the facility for like 6 weeks. We couldn't get the servers up.
Yeah, that facility we did a temporary flat fab floor in that it was his burned, and we had encapsulated it in stainless steel and got it up and running in 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
28 days.
That's impressive. Very impressive.
Considering we cut 22 feet off of all 4 fabrication lines, yeah, that is amazing.
That was 24 hours a day.
I slept in my car in the parking lot for like 3 weeks.
So what does it take for organizations to invest in the prevention side of things rather than the urgency of reaction from your perspective in preparedness as well as disaster relief?
I think that they need to start first with a hard look at what their insurance is and where they're insured at. When was the last time they looked at their policy? Sit down and talk to a risk manager. Call yourself, call Don, call Darin, call me. We can, assist you in pointing you in the right direction. Those are areas that, that I think you need to start at. If you can't do it on your own, you need to get some professional help. And I think that the group here that has been through this and from Don and I's point of view, living and breathing this for most of our careers, would be a good place to start.
Darin still practices. Their city calls him all the time. They're like, "Hey, the Olympics are coming. You're going to help us."
It's funny that you brought that up, Darin. It's I was in Hilton Head during the Masters, and the one thing I never thought of, I didn't think about it, but after that event, it was okay. I found out that you can purchase passes to get where you need to be on those roads that are closed, but you need to apply for those 3 months in advance. So good point is you want to be looking at those items ahead of schedule. Who are my clients in that area? Okay, they may not have anything, but the $300 or $400 I pay in fees to have that access during that time is priceless to my client. So you need to be prepared and not a doomsday prepper, but you need to have your systems in play. Look at your clientele. Where's your clientele at? If my client, you may not be a client of a company, call and say, "Hey, we have this event coming. Can we retain your services, temporarily for 3 months? What's that look like? And what can you do if something is to happen to our facility during an event when everything's closed? How does that work for you? How can you help facilitate us getting the services that we need?" So, look at that side of it as well.
Well, and I was going to say, and talking to other companies that have been in these situations, even if you're a competitor, because I know of situations where entire school districts and companies weighed the pros and cons of what we would have to do to stay in operation during this major sporting event. And when they weighed everything, their best option was, I think we just cancel school that week, or I think we cancel production on these 3 days when it's going to be the highest potential of a disruption that we can't resolve because of what's going on.
And you also have to look at what are they manufacturing? Is it food? Is it mechanical? Is it automotive? Is it farming equipment? What is it? And can we afford to be shut down for 3 days and not produce? If it's medical, the answer is probably no. If it's food, the answer is probably no, because you're going to have product that's going to need to be processed. And
unless you give yourself enough time.
Exactly.
To go, okay, look, if we expedite this, if we move the schedules here and we deplete this by the time this happens, then we don't have to worry about that. Obviously, that's not a fit for every case, but I think people don't realize sometimes how much early, worst case scenario, round table, tabletop exercises. What if this happens? What are we going to do? As opposed to, well, we don't have any time now because it's too late for us to figure it out.
Yeah.
A great statement. Tabletop exercises, simulation. I'll take something from Don where he said pet peeve. I find it very challenging when people think that something is turnkey. Oh, Tom, make me a go bag. It's like, no, that's not how it works. You got to make your own and evaluate, is it still effective today? Just because it was effective yesterday, things have changed.
I can help you with that, but I can't put it together for you. One of the questions for me when I go into a new facility, whether it's I've been to the same type of facility 100 times, is what's your daily burn rate? What's your accident rate? What's your taxes? What's your insurance? What do you do here? I make car parts. I slaughter chickens. I know that. How does that process work? Know your client. Mm-hmm. Know their product. I don't care if you've done it 100 times. You're going to learn something new. Somebody's always doing something a little different than the last guy. So you need to just have all those ducks in a row, I guess.
That put a smile on everyone's face. I want to keep going, but I think we should land the plane soon. And so with that, I'm proposing that we make a tradition out of our guests being a part of each episode to recommend another guest next time. It doesn't have to be in writing. Obviously, we have it recorded here, so we have it in writing. It's being transcripted, quote unquote. But who would you recommend, even if it's not about preparedness or disaster relief, or it can be? It could be anybody, but who do you think would be another guest to invite to this? And we'll make this an informal invitation to them to eventually make it a formal invitation.
I think a risk manager, a restoration company, a contractor, a supplier of the things that we need to help put you back together. I have several that I have in mind.
Tim Foster would be one of those I'd like to ask. I think he would be a very good one.
Yes, he'd be very good. I think Ryan Glasscock with Signature Group would be another good one.
Yeah.
I was actually talking with a former colleague from an event Don and I met on to see if they would be interested in having a conversation with us. But yeah, there's several, and if I can reach out if you'd like and introduce you, and can go forward from there.
Well, I think we'll take that opportunity. Yes. So I've seen in some of the podcasts that capture my attention is there's always something that's done towards the end of the episode. It's either a question or, they ask you a particular situation. But I thought, why don't we extend it to create this greater community and do this greater outreach because of what this podcast is supposed to be, as well as the summit when it comes online August 14th of 2026. The initial one will be there online, and so we can make it most feasible for everybody. And the tickets are about to go up for everybody for the early bird access. So with that, Darin, I know you said you needed to go, but any closing remarks for us? You want to share anything about your other podcast? You are, sir, a very, very busy man.
Yeah, I co-host Confessions of a Food Safety A-Hole, which kind of looks at the behind-the-scenes work that I do. There's another podcast called Spoiler Alert, which looks at things coming up on the horizon. And I think in both cases, the important thing is really being honest with ourselves. It's not about what looks good on paper, what looks good to your stockholders, what looks good to your insurance company, what looks good to your auditor or your inspector, but the reality behind things. Because if you are truly trying to put your head around likelihood and severity and what we need to do going forward, if you're not honest to the point where you're being an a-hole, then you're not really prepared.
Correct. Agreed 100%.
Don, any closing remarks for you, sir?
I don't think so. I think I've pretty much been fine.
Well, with that, I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much. This was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Thought Leader Product Safety Innovation Podcast. If this conversation raised new questions or perspectives, we invite you to continue it with us at the upcoming Thought Leaders Summit this summer. You can find more details in the show notes. Until next time, keep asking the questions that matter.